I was a professor in a medical school. I can tell you right out, it's a fact. The pharmaceutical company has a big footprint in that curriculum. When there are ways to heal without drugs, it's restricted and not talked about in medical school. They sell drugs.
Before I met you and I was introduced to your work, I guess I would say mired or anchored in genetic determinism, okay? And I read about 1953, Watson and Crick, they enter this tavern, the Eagle Tavern somewhere in England, and they say, we've discovered the secret of life, right? And of course they were referring to the structure of DNA, this kind of staircase-like double helix, which explained how DNA replicates so elegantly, right? And this propelled us for 50 some odd years to learn everything about underlying genetics in DNA, because we thought that our behavior and our functionality and even our disease could be mapped onto every one of those genes. So that's what I believed until I read your book, The Biology of Belief. So where did we get it wrong?
Well, I guess the first thing I really want to bring up, because everyone gives them the credit for the DNA double helix, and it was actually a woman.
That's right.
Rosalind Franklin.
Rosalind Franklin.
And everybody says, who's Rosalind Franklin? Well, she's the one who discovered the DNA double helix, but, that's the old boys club. That's the way it worked, okay? And I was teaching that in medical school. I was a professor in medical school, and that was exactly the stuff I was teaching. But I was also doing research on cloning cells, and I was cloning stem cells. And stem cells, that's a very fancy name. They're embryonic cells. That's what they are. I say, why do we have stem cells? And the answer is, well, I refer to our body as skin-covered petri dish with 50 trillion cells inside. And every second, we lose 3.5 million cells die. Every second, okay? Yeah, so just the last few seconds, oh my God, we're falling apart here. Okay. But the beautiful part about it is the body's stem cells are the source of replacement. So as fast as we lose them, the stem cells replace them. So we stay pretty much stable in that situation. And while I was teaching genetic determinism, I was cloning stem cells. So I need to emphasize what that means. I put one stem cell in a dish all by itself. It divides every 10, 12 hours. So first there's 1, then there's 2, 4, 8, doubling. At the end of the week, 30,000 cells in the dish. But the important fact of this kind of work is that all 30,000 cells are genetically identical from this parent cell. So I have these genetically identical cells. I split them up, 10,000 cells in each of 3 dishes, all dishes genetically identical. I grow cells, and we all grow cells in a liquid called growth medium. And the secret is growth medium is a laboratory version of blood. So when I grow human cells, what's human blood made out of? And I synthesize that in the lab, okay? In the research, I recognize that sometimes my cells don't breed true, that, they're supposed to be muscle precursors, and sometimes they form fibroblasts or cartilage and stuff like that. So I started to work on that, and I said, wait, I made 3 different versions of culture medium because I created in the lab. So chemically, they were pretty almost identical, but a couple of things were different. So I have three different versions of culture medium, A, B, C. Dishes 1, 2, 3. And so in dish 1, culture medium A. In dish 2, culture medium B. In dish 3, culture medium C. About 4 days later, the dish 1, the cells are forming muscle. The second dish, dish 2, with different environment, they started forming bone. And the third dish, with a different environment, started forming fat cells. Wow, wait a minute. They're all genetically identical. What happened? How come muscle, bone, fat, where did that come from? The answer was, it wasn't from the cells, it was from the environment, okay? And all of a sudden, well, this challenges everything I'm talking about, because genes were supposed to be controlling this. And I go, no, this is controlled by the fluid in the environment, growth medium. Then I take the next step, of course, which is the human body is a skin-covered petri dish with 50 trillion cells in it. And we have the original growth medium, blood. And I say, it doesn't make a difference if the cell's in the plastic dish or the skin covered dish, it's still responding to the environmental growth medium. It's the chemistry. So I started looking and go, wait a minute, the cells are being controlled by the chemistry of the blood. Yeah, that's a fact. Then the next question was, well, who controls the chemistry? And that comes to the brain, okay? And so, oh yeah, brain controls the chemistry. But the biggest question was, so what chemistry should go into the blood? And that's the part that when I started working, I was like, oh my God, it blew my mind. Because it said, whatever picture we hold in our mind, the job of the brain is to translate it into complementary chemistry. There's a chemistry for fear, there's a chemistry for love, there's a chemistry for anger. And when you're experiencing these things, the brain releases that chemistry into the blood, the culture medium. That chemistry then goes to the cells and adjusts their genetics. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, we're creating our genetic expression by whatever picture of consciousness we're holding in our head. And that was like, wow. Because just very simply, genetic determinism, you're a victim. You didn't pick the genes, you can't change them, and they turn on and off by themselves, you just get the consequence. The new thing I was studying, which is now called epigenetics, showed that the environment was controlling the genes. And since we can control the environment, then all of a sudden it says, wait a minute, then we can be masters. So we go from genetics victim, epigenetics master of our genetics.
Amazing. I mean, that must have been just a paradigm-changing aha moment for you. And isn't it funny that we call the biological medium a culture? Right?
Yeah, it is. It's basically, yeah.
Because obviously, if you were to put, as you did, cells in a different culture, there's a different expression. You put humans in a different culture, and there's a different expression.
Yeah, you know, an interesting aspect, as we were talking about very recently, was cancers, for example, fit different cultures. Different cancers fit different cultures. But they found that, for example, in Chinese, there are different cancers that they get, not like in the US, which is primarily breast cancer and prostate cancer. But they found that when Chinese then came to the United States, then they got the same cancers as the people in the United States. So all of a sudden it was like, wow, the environment, big time.
Yeah, it wasn't
determining
the genetic activity. It was the medium in which they were immersed in. I'm curious, when you say that anger or love creates a certain blood chemistry,
yes,
are you referring to like catecholamines or oxytocin, or cortisol,
epinephrine? All the factors that come from the brain, or a lot of them are growth factors, neuropeptides, hormones, emotional chemicals. We can put them in different classifications, but they're all secretions, and the secretions have to be linked to the consciousness, which is then the most powerful thing in the world. So we'll change your consciousness and you change your genetics. It's like, whoa. And there's a very important part, because we've been programmed to believe more or less that the illnesses that we face on the planet are genetic origins and all that. The research has revealed that's a completely false statement. Less than 1% of illness is connected to genes. Less than 1%. Well, it's got 99% of illness. Where the hell is that coming from? Lifestyle, stress is the biggest one.
Yeah. So yeah, like you point, there's like sickle cell anemia or something. There's these outliers that seem to be more controlled by genetics or genetic mutations.
But it's a small less than 1% of all total illness is that.
Right. And it is, so do you believe then it is within our power, within our own individual sovereignty, to be able to change our perceptions such that we can change our chemistry and then, by extension, change the expression of our genes?
Not that I believe in it, it's a scientific reality at this point. That is a fact, that we're beginning to recognize that illnesses are associated with a person's psychology and the behavior that they have to experience wherever they're living, when they're living. And this is really great, because it gives us the understanding that we are more powerful than the genes after how many years, 50, 60 years of the genes control me. And it's like, no, they don't. And that's a radical change because it takes us from victim. I'm a victim of my heredity. No. Right. I'm a master of my heredity.
Yeah. I was recently having a conversation with a friend. We were talking about the classification of obesity as a disease, which was, I think, in 2013. And once we classify things as diseases, then that allows us to treat them as pathologies with certain kinds of pharmaceutical prescriptions, right? So
yeah. Well, that's where the thing, falls off the table at that point. As soon as you put pharmaceuticals in there, because people don't recognize it, that pharmaceutical prescriptions kill 300,000 Americans every year. 100,000 from illegal drugs. 300,000 pharmaceutical prescriptions. And because it doesn't work, and it's a belief system, it works best as a placebo, at best.
Right.
Which means it wasn't the drug, but it was your belief in the drug that made it work.
Right, so that's got to be up there in like third or fourth position in terms of overall mortality, right? So there's heart disease, cancer.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Heart disease, number 1. Cancer, number 2. Number 3?
Well, sounds like you answered it, but I don't know I think there's some clinical term for it.
There is a clinical term, but that's because when you give the clinical term in Latin, nobody understands what that. Iatrogenic illness. What is iatrogenic illness? Definition: illness as a result of medical treatment. And the Journal of the American Medical Association, their own journal, acknowledged in the year, I think it was 2000, that medicine was the 3rd leading cause of death. And then in 2016, the British Medical Journal, BMJ, did the same research, same conclusion. Medicine is the 3rd leading cause of death. And yet we have this whole belief that that's our saving grace. And it's like, maybe not if you really get down to understanding this. I trust more like surgery because that's mechanical. Yeah. But when they want to do chemical healing and stuff like that, it's completely out of sync with the way the body operates. The body doesn't just throw chemistry into the blood. Body releases, if it needs it in the heart, it releases it at the heart. If it needs it in the ovary, it releases the estrogen, let's say, in the ovary. It doesn't throw it in the blood and let it go everywhere because there's no control. Yeah. And so the idea of systemic, throw something in the body, and I say, I want to target this thing. I say, yeah, but everything is interconnected. So you were focusing on this, but your drug also affects this. Well, they say side effects. That's a euphemism. Oh, that's just on the side. I go, no, the correct word is direct effect. It's a direct effect of the drug, but it wasn't the intention of the drug. The intention was fix this, side effect, direct effect, alters that. And that's what you didn't count on, so that's listed as a side effect.
And there's no clinical research around cocktails of simultaneous pharmaceuticals, right? Because we don't know how one might interact with another, what might interact with another.
This is part of the iatrogenic illness, yeah. So I have a neurologist who gives me this drug, and I have an internist who gives me this drug, and they're not talking to each other. No. And it's like, but if you put both these drugs in at the same time, you get a panoply of effects that you didn't count on. And then they write it off as side effects. And I go, no, it's not. You guys aren't paying attention. But the point, is really important here, because sometimes it comes down to the doctor, and like, oh, the doctor did this, the doctor did this. And I want to correct that. It's the way the doctors were programmed to do that. They didn't just do it. That was the teaching and the programming. So if there's an issue, I don't want to blame the doctors because they're following whatever the protocol was. Right. It's the other people. Yeah. And unfortunately, look, I was a professor in a medical school. I can tell you right out, it's a fact. The pharmaceutical company has a big footprint in that curriculum. And when there are ways to heal without drugs, it's restricted and not talked about in medical school. They sell drugs.
Yeah. Well, we both know hundreds upon hundreds of doctors. I would say 99% of them, over 99% of them, enter medicine for altruistic purposes.
Oh.
They want to help. They have the biggest hearts of almost anyone I've ever met.
Yeah.
And as you say, unfortunately, we get into systems and structures, which many of them, especially the primary care physicians that I know, or the family practice doctors, who are the first line of defense, really, who can actually administer the preventative lifestyle protocols that could stop the progression of disease in its tracks. These people are so strapped, they've got 10 minutes max.
Oh, 10, that's a big number. I think Kaiser Permanente is 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
4 minutes.
What are you going to do in 4 minutes?
You're going to, the thing they're expecting, you interview them for 4 minutes, and when they walk away, they have a prescription for a drug. That means then you're following standard medical practice. And if you don't offer a prescription, then that doctor gets a side glance from the administrators above the system. It's a drug dealing system. Basically they sell drugs. Can you heal without drugs? Yeah, many things. Are we hearing about it? No, it's not in the interest of the industry that controls this all money to offer you that. I mean, how much energy healing is being taught in medical school? Virtually nothing. Yeah. It's like, but that's the future.
It's coming up.
It has to, because it's a disaster of what we have right now.
Yeah. So we live in an era of political tumult, economic tumult. There are multiple wars happening. There is an election. So we're inundated, right, with media that is designed, algorithmically fixed to essentially push on human negativity bias, to trigger anger, outrage, distrust, etc., that by your logic then has these knock-on impacts. How do we navigate this time with where there is so much external stress?
Well, Buckminster Fuller, the futurist, gave us the answer. He said, don't go in and try and change the system. Step outside and create a better system, and the people will come to that. And that is, I think, one of the most important things, because when you go and try and change the system, you're going up against a powerful force. I say, they'll eat you alive. You're not going to make it. No crusader is going to get through all that kind of stuff like that. So you kill yourself trying to change it from the inside. Go outside. Yeah, complementary medicine, integrative medicine was really an outside phenomenon. But at some point, what sells it? Not the drug companies, not the medical school, the patients. The patients find, oh my God, this guy did this thing, and I feel so much better. Then they tell their friends and their friends. So over 50% of the population now seeks help from the outside people, the integrative people.
Yeah, what used to be sort of marginal medicine.
Yeah, but it's the one that works compared to the one that you're buying into from the conventional world.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not a very big fan of the pharmaceutical industry because they sell drugs and that's their intention. Can I heal without drugs? Not their intention. They got to sell a drug, otherwise the business doesn't work.
Yeah.
Are they selling drugs because they want to help me? I go, that's a bunch of BS. It means belief system, because the idea of selling the drugs is to help us, and it's like they're not helping people. The health crisis is worse every year, no matter how much money you put into making more and more drugs, because it's not the appropriate way. It doesn't fit the physics, and all of a sudden you go, oh wait, what's that mean? Very briefly. Conventional medicine is based on Newtonian physics. I go, what's that mean? It subdivides the universe into two realms, matter and energy. And it says matter affects matter, energy affects energy. You're a body made out of matter. What do you think you need? More matter. So that's the foundation of the pharmaceutical industry. Matter affects matter. Quantum physics, 1927, said, well, this whole idea of matter is an illusion. Everything is energy, which means energy is now the primary source. And so energy healing, energy psychology, all different versions of learning how to live in harmony with energy is really the direction people are moving. And as I said, 50% of the population will seek an outside healer instead of going into conventional allopathic field.
Yeah, that seems like an esoteric idea, but we actually know that it's true by product of our own direct experience all the time. I mean, if I were to essentially say, Bruce, there's a snake over there, unless you were essentially a herpologist,
Yeah.
you would look over there and something, my excitement or would trigger this cascade across down your HPA axis, and your adrenals would start producing cortisol, right? So we know that just me saying something, producing a sound wave of energy that then you perceive in a particular way, we know that then that creates a specific molecule in the body. We know this,
yeah.
right?
And the consequence of the health crisis is based on three aspects of that stress release you just talked about, the stress hormones. And virtually, less than 1% of disease is genes. Mm-hmm. The rest of it is living in a stress world. Mm. And the pharmaceuticals don't help us in that stress world at all. No. It's the consciousness. You have to change, get out of the stress.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, because, we are going to get bombarded. And we have been already, and certainly we saw, this was presaged in COVID, but 2024 is not going to be any kinder to us. So as it comes to stress management and emotional regulation, what are the techniques and protocols that we can apply to remain kind of centered and in our parasympathetic state?
The simplest answer, knowledge is power. We have been programmed with information that's not valid, but we live by that information, and if it's not valid, then our life becomes, concerned over, this is not normal, this behavior that we're engaging isn't what's necessary, and we have to change that. We have to get out. We have to give people knowledge, and it's not forthcoming from the drug companies, especially it's not forthcoming from the media, because the media gets paid by the drug companies. I remember when the COVID crap was going around, and there was a little video that showed at the end of every major news service, CBS, NBC, ABC, at the end, this show sponsored by Pfizer Pharmaceutical. I go, every news broadcast is sponsored by the pharmaceutical company. There's a simple understanding in business. You don't mess with the people who give you your money. So what do? You don't talk about it. And so the media is paid off, and it conforms to exactly what the companies want to sell you. And people watch TV like it's a true story, and they watch the news like they're getting real news. They're not getting the real stuff. Behind the scenes, there's something going on, and we are being manipulated. And the way to manipulate people is disempower them. Because if they have power, then you can't disregard them. So our growing up has been a whole process of being disempowered from the very beginning. Who are we? Oh, I'm nobody, Oh, my genes control my life. I don't control anything, or whatever it is. People have given up because their programming didn't say they were powerful at all. It just kept reinforcing the belief that, well, you're a defective human. You got bad cells, you got bad genes, you got bad blah, blah, blah. And I go, people have no belief in their own power. Well, that means then they have no power. And that means then they're exactly where the corporations want them.
So people need a reprogramming.
100%. And there's been a renaissance in science that changes even where those beliefs came from. We have a renaissance in physics, which recognizes as a science spirituality. When I was teaching in medical school, you couldn't say the word spirit. That was forbidden. You couldn't even use the word consciousness. That was forbidden in trying to understand medicine. It was genes and cells, and don't bring that other stuff in. But now, hey, epigenetics, quantum physics, the whole thing about nutrition, which was never taught in medical school, this is changing the public. They're getting into it a bit. And they're asking questions where they never asked questions before. They just bought it. Oh, that's just the way it is. Now it's like, maybe it's not that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're sitting here having this conversation. I have certain desires for you to be comfortable and for this conversation to go well. And I'm using energy to mechanically move my lips to make words. And that's happening in my conscious realm.
Yes.
Right? But I'm not at all focused on beating my heart or on cellular respiration happening under the crust. I'm not even remotely conscious of 95, 97% of things happening.
95% of your behavior is coming from the subconscious mind. Now, it's not just the heartbeat and the temperature and the pH and all that. That's the behavior you're expressing. It's been programmed. Right. And the idea about that is our programs are all programs of disempowerment. Who do you think you are? You're not that smart. You're not that good. You don't deserve this. That's what kids get.
Yeah.
And by the time they grow up, they believe, I don't deserve it, and I'm a weak person, and these people are strong, and I'm weak. And you give up your power to the one you perceive to be where you're going to get your healing from. And we've given up our power to the medical profession. Well, again, it's not the medical doctors, it's the people who teach the medical doctors, and more importantly, the people who fund the teachers of the medical system, because we're getting programs with an emphasis on the best intention of the funder, which is to make money.
And at what point, when are we most susceptible to that subconscious programming?
About 95% of the day. 5% of the day, the epigenetics, the mind controls genes. I go, the mind. And everybody goes, oh, the mind. I go, well, wait, there's two minds. I go, and they're interdependent and they don't have the same function. If you don't make a distinguishing insight into why they're different and what their functions are, then it makes no sense. There's the conscious mind, which is the latest evolution of the brain, right behind your forehead, prefrontal cortex part of the brain, the seat of your spirit and who you are as an individual. And about 90% of the brain back here is called the subconscious. There's two different functions. Conscious mind is creative. Subconscious mind is habit, program. Okay? And the significance is, well, we've all been programmed. Everybody's been programmed. That's how you got to here. The first 7 years of a child's life, the brain is operating at a lower functional level than consciousness. It's operating at something called theta, which is characterized as imagination, which kids under 7 bring into the real world, imagination. And this is where we download behavior by observing other people. So I said, where'd you get your behavioral program? Oh, I watched my father, I watched my mother, my siblings, I watched the community in which I live, downloaded their behavior, because theta is hypnosis. And I downloaded, which is fundamental to get a kid off the ground, just as much as fundamental you buy a brand new computer. If you don't put a program in, it's useless. You get a brand new computer. First you put the program in, then you can use it. Same with the brain. The program goes in the first 7 years. From where? Not from you, but from observing other people. So I say, okay, so my programs, 60% of which are dysfunctional and self-sabotaging and limiting in behavior, are programs in the subconscious. But the conscious mind around age 7 starts to kick in, so now you can be creative. You can use thinking and do all that great stuff. The problem that people don't recognize is that the conscious mind can do two things. One, it could look out your eyes and see the world and lead you to where you want to go. I want to go here, I want to do this. That's conscious mind, okay? But then the conscious mind can think. And then all of a sudden the game is different. I say, why? Because when you're paying attention, you're looking out at the world and engaging the world. But when you're thinking, your conscious mind's not looking out at the world. It's inside, because thoughts are on the inside. So the moment you're thinking, conscious mind is disengaged from control. That's when the subconscious mind comes in as autopilot. So the behaviors that you downloaded become the program that you play. And it turns out 95% of the day. And then there's a problem because you're inside your head thinking when the program is playing, you didn't see your own program. You didn't even see your own behavior. but everybody else did. And they respond to those programs. So if you have negative programs, you're not going to get a positive feedback from the people around you because they're going to observe all your negative stuff. You're the one that's not going to see any of it. You have no idea.
Yes, my children remind me of this very fact on a daily basis. And, you know, it's interesting. We were talking before about the possibility for reprogramming, or at least pulling back the curtain on people's own programming.
Yes, because we don't see it.
We don't see it. And that can have devastating impacts. So right now, as we speak, there's just an absolutely odious war happening everywhere, but particularly in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And I know that you convened a group some years ago in Tel Aviv. Can you just talk a little bit about that experience?
Very briefly. I was part of an organization called Uplift, which is the idea is to uplift people by giving them knowledge. And at the University of Tel Aviv, big auditorium, mainly Israelis, but we bussed in over 300 Palestinians from the West Bank. Most of them never even been in Israel before. So they come into this auditorium, and of course, the Israelis are over here, the Palestinians are over here. They don't talk to each other, you know. And I go through the science of programming, and I talk about the nature. Yeah, the child, first 7 years, is state of hypnosis. You download a belief, it becomes a program, and then for the rest of the child's life, 95% is coming from these programs that you downloaded. So I give them the technical story. And then I love it because I had a slide come up, and it was a black screen, but white above it said, "The problem." And when I pushed the button, 2 pictures came up side by side. One picture, Israeli boys playing with machine guns, young kids. The other picture was Palestinian kids dressed up in military uniform with rifles, you know, just like military. I said, "What are you programming here? These kids, they don't even know each other, but now they hate each other. Why? Because you just put this program in there. And you made them violent. You put their guns and all this stuff. It's a war. You're creating a war here." I said, "This is the programming that has caused all the separation here." And I said, "There is a solution." Next slide, solution, black screen, solution. 2 pictures come up, and it's an Israeli boy and a Palestinian boy playing together. The other picture was, again, an Israeli girl and a Palestinian girl playing together. And I said, these kids will not fight each other. The other picture, you're going to generate this. I said, you have been creating this yourself. Well, for a lecturer, it was a moment of intensity. Why? The air got sucked out of the room. It was a vacuum, more or less. You could drop a pin in this auditorium and you could hear it because it was like, and for a moment, the awareness hit them. My God, we are creating and perpetuating this by the way we're programming our children. Mm-hmm. And it was so great because after that, when the conference part was over, there was the refreshments out in the foyer and there was music and dancing and stuff. The Palestinians and Israelis came together. They were dancing and sharing food and talking and all that. When they first came in, oil and water. Mm-hmm. But when they finally got it, it was so simple. Just the picture alone showed them, it's like, oh my God, look what we're doing to our kids.
Yeah.
So
that's an amazing story. And just to tie genetics back in there, I mean, the majority of Israeli citizens and even Jews actually come from their Sephardic or Mizrahi Jews that were dislocated, after 1948 and moved to Israel when Palestinians were sent out, and were called the Nakba. And so genetically, there is almost no discernible difference between these groups of people.
Absolutely not.
So again, we think that we shape the world, but the world so often shapes us, and the conflict there, as is the case in so many different places, is the programming.
This is exactly what it's all about. And it's interesting because at the same place, there was a presentation from a couple that I met there who were just a wonderful, Aura is the Israeli woman, Ehab, the Palestinian boy. They were both walking across the Sinai Desert toward each other. And they got about 10 to 15 feet apart, and they both stopped. And they saw each other. They saw each other. I think in The Godfather, they call it the thunderbolt. Yeah. They got hit. Yeah. And they fell in love, and 3 days later, they got married. But then the fallout. He went home and told his Palestinian parents, I married an Israeli girl, and his father physically chased him around the house with a knife. He was going to cut him. She went home, told her family she married a Palestinian boy. They disowned her. Get out of here. Don't come back. So now they're alone. They have a boy, a child, and it's getting about 4, and they say, oh my God, we got to send him to school. So they went to the Israeli school, both of them. They looked at it and they said, no, can't send the kid to this school. They went to the Palestinian school. No, we can't send the kid to this school. They're both so diametrically opposed in philosophy. And I love it because the funny part was they went to the Christian school and they both agreed, no, we're not sending him to that school. So they created a school called the Garden of Abraham because Abraham was a prophet for both the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I went to that school and visited, and these kids, aged from about 4 to 7, they play together, they learn together. The teachers are both Israeli and Palestinian. They learn each other's culture, each other's language. They become best of friends. The point about it is these kids will never, ever fight each other. And that was the resolution, is you're separating them, giving them different programs that are antagonistic. But if you bring them together, kids are kids. They play, they learn, and they create bonds that will never be broken about that.
But who makes the better hummus?
Well, in Jerusalem, I can tell you where I went, okay?
Well, first of all, I'm so grateful that you've come up to this strange little cabin in the hills called Commune with very limited cellular service. You're very brave to do that.
No, I am honored to be here because this is the same kind of thing as Garden of Abraham. People can come here. It's not for conflict. It's for resolution of conflict. And that's what community is all about. And it's interesting because the philosophy that we have been living by in the Western world is Darwinian philosophy. And Darwin's philosophy, the main emphasis is competition, which came from an earlier philosopher, Thomas Malthus. And his simple premise, which is totally wrong, but fed the idea to Darwin, was that food doesn't reproduce as fast as animals. So if you're looking at the growth, food stays more level while animals keep doubling their population. Was a point that says, well, obviously there's more animals than available food. So the conclusion was simple. There's going to be competition, conflict. Who's going to get the food? So it comes into Darwin's theory, and he writes it as survival of the fittest in the struggle for life. Right. Competition. That we've been programmed by that. Everyone's been programmed. Go out and do better. Do better than that person, or you're not going to get your share. And everybody's competing. The idea of competition is not bringing people together. It's actually separating people because you're not friends with your competitor. You want to beat your competitor. And that theory has, altered Western civilization because everyone believes it's true. Right. But Malthus was 100% wrong. Animals don't exceed the growth of the plants. There's a stability that happens in animals. They flatten out and the curve stays flat. And it's actually biologically, 2 parents make 2 parents. That's what biological outcome is. So the whole idea was false, a premise that leads to a world of competition. It's a Darwinian world out there. And the idea that's not evolution. Evolution is the opposite. Evolution is cooperation. And when I mention in the lectures, I talk, well, the garden. Yeah, we came from a garden. And I say, but do you understand a garden, by definition, is the height of cooperation? Every organism in the garden is supporting every other organism in the garden, including us, until we got in the garden. And now we're destroying the garden because of what? The competition. And it's like, it's not, a garden's peaceful. It's not a battleground, but we've turned it into a battleground.
I think that in some ways, I'd say that we've misconstrued the notion of what survival of the fittest means, because if you actually study what is most fit, you find phenotypes that are communal, that are cooperative, that recognize
That's really what it's all about, which is cooperation.
But we've associated this notion of survival of the fittest with sort of a rugged individualism. And
America.
America.
Go out there. The biggest guy wins. The biggest gun is the winner. It's like you could be Albert Einstein or some idiot with an Uzi. I say, how's that competition going to work out? I go, sorry, Einstein. Boom, gone. Uzi guy wins. I go, that's not evolution. That's devolution. And that's what's happening in our world right now.
Yeah.
We have gone so far the other way that we're breaking down human society as simultaneously breaking down the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Well, you must have hope, because otherwise you wouldn't be traveling the world like a maniac. Even you don't have to get out of your bungalow in Santa Cruz if you didn't want to. So you must believe that there is some hope for this species.
That's more than believe, I live it. So that's a whole different story. When I started to understand the nature of how environment was controlling genetics and all that, I got out of that conventional Darwinian, competition thing, started to understand this. The true story is, when I first understood the mechanisms between quantum physics and epigenetics, the science of environment controlling genes, I said, oh my God, if you understand these things, then you can create this most beautiful life. So I was so excited by the science. I was a science geeky guy, and I thought, I'm going to grab a bunch of people, bring them in here, I'm going to give them, this is how to create the most beautiful life. Well, about before midway into the lecture, people are looking at me going, Lipton, for a guy who says this stuff, your life doesn't look that good, and then the truth hit me in a very sobering way. Is like, I'm talking the talk, but I'm not walking the talk. I was just giving the science.
Yeah.
And
wisdom is taking her own advice.
Well, that was the part where I said, I'm not lecturing unless I apply this. And I was thinking, boy, maybe I'll never lecture again if it doesn't work. But the fabulous thing was, within days of applying the new knowledge as a way of life, my life changed profoundly. I live today, I live a honeymoon experience with my partner, 28 years, every day, 28 years, honeymoon, wake up going, hey, we're still here. What's fun today? What are we going to do? And I've let go of the stressors that almost everybody has. What it actually did is it brought better things into my life. When I was holding the stressors, I was actually keeping things out of my life because of the perception of stress. When I let go of the stress, more positive things came in. So I walk around today and say, yeah, man, I live heaven on earth in the middle of all this stuff, You can walk across a bed of hot coals, I love it. I show a video of people in the South when they work themselves up into religious ecstasy. They do testifying that God protects them. One of the things they do is drink strychnine poison in toxic doses, and they have no harmful effect. And it's like, how's that happen? The answer is, your thought was going to let the strychnine into your body, the conventional belief. But their belief is protection. So guess what? They can swallow the strychnine. People think if you put something in your mouth, it's in your body. I go, no. There's a pipe. It starts at the mouth, goes to the anus. If you can stretch it out, it's a tube. Anything in the tube is not in the body. It comes in, goes out.
But will it get absorbed?
Well, the absorption is then, and this is the better insight too, because it's based on your consciousness. Are you building a healthy body? Is that your intention? Or are you just, more sugar and more, carbs and all that kind of stuff because you don't care?
Right.
Well, if you don't care, then the body will make a picture of I don't care, and you're going to get unhealthy. If you want to be healthy, then you start living healthy, and your body gets healthy. And I say, so what's the difference? I say, what comes across the gut is to manifest the picture. If the picture is I'm healthy, then only good stuff is going to come across the gut. If it's like, then anything can come across the gut. Strychnine did not come across the gut. It went down the tube and came out the other end. Why? The belief system said, I will not be affected by this. I will not take this in. Okay?
Can that work with tequila?
Every person who drinks has a different response based on their consciousness of what they were looking for, you know?
Fair enough.
But this is so critical because we underestimate who we are.
Mm-hmm.
We've been programmed that we're victims. Everything can hurt us. Well, if that's your program, then things hurt you because you expect them to hurt you. But what if you were programmed not to, it's not going to bother me? All of a sudden it changes, then what's going to happen with your experiences?
I just find that this time in science and the merging of mysticism and medicine to be just such a fascinating time to be alive. I mean, I sometimes compare it to what it was like to be a scientist at the beginning of the 20th century, when quantum physics upended sort of fixed mechanical Newtonian theory, and all of a sudden we realized that life wasn't fixed and time wasn't particularly linear, it was relative.
All these things crashed the old picture, and then you had to build a new picture coming up. And it's so profound, I always think about it. The idea was new in 1927. And by 1944, they created an atomic bomb. Of course, because we were looking for give me the war use of this new physics. Right. I go, how fast did it go from an idea into actually dropping an atomic bomb? That's how valid this science is. But the validity of the science is really, it was coached in terms by Max Planck, one of the founding fathers. 1927, day one, quantum physics is here. His quote, "The mind is the creator of our life experiences."
Right.
And it's ever been that way since quantum physics, even to the extent that I use in my lectures an article from the journal Nature, which is the most prestigious scientific journal, from a physicist, Richard Conn Henry, Johns Hopkins University. The title is called The Mental Universe. And I tell them in the lecture, I say, well, this is a physics article, but I tell you what, I don't want to read the article. You know what I'm going to do? I'll show you the last sentence. And the last sentence reads, "The universe is immaterial." Basically, that's the physics of energy, okay? It's not matter, it's energy. It goes, "The universe is immaterial. It's mental and spiritual. Live and enjoy." And I thought, holy God. They used the word spiritual in the nature of the most. When I was in medical school, you were not allowed to use that. Even when I used the word mind in a paper, a scientific paper, the editor people said, you can't use that word, you have to take the mind out. There's no mind, we don't talk mind in medical school. I go, wow, you see, that's the previous Newtonian version.
Yeah.
But quantum physics takes us to a new world.
Yeah. Even such that we can't even observe an electron, right, without changing its behavior. And some of this notion that that the nature of reality is based in consciousness it can really be experienced kind of in everyday life, just through like a spatial relativity or whatever. It's like I'm here experiencing the world because I'm spatially sitting here looking this way. I can't see the books behind me, but you can. So that seems very kind of instinctual, right? Time, the notion that time is subjective and relative, that's hard at the terrestrial level because essentially we're experiencing time very similarly because the speed of light is constant and so fast, right? But at the level of astrophysics, a photon would take 35 extra minutes to get to Jupiter than it would to get here. So then it's more observable. But what that underwrites is that time is actually a product of the participant's experience of it, right?
Right.
And so it's such
that's the hardest part about physics. Oh, time is not linear. Everything's all at once. Yeah. And it's like, okay, I can't put that in my head.
No, it's hard.
It doesn't compute in my head. But it's a fact of science.
That's right. And then it curves around big mass objects. And so this notion that, time isn't fixed, for example, I feel like we're discovering that that epigenetics was sort of the biological discovery of some of those similar precepts, that we were not fixed. Or the microbiome, same kind of thing.
Oh, microbiome is wonderful.
We're not fixed. We're in a constant change in relation to our environment. Our bacteria, these little prokaryotes, are dying every 4 minutes to a couple hours, and they're flipping over and all of this stuff. But there's nothing reliable or stable of what it is like to be Jeff. I just sort of have a sense of my own self through the continuity of my physiology and my psychology, but I'm in a constant state of change, and it's a dance, and we're having it. Right,
and while we've been sitting here, how many billion cells have you just lost in that process that you didn't know happened?
So the moral of the story is we can change. In fact, we're not only can change, all we are is change.
Yeah, and if we had knowledge of this change, then we could use it. And if you don't have knowledge, then you're stuck behind with some old belief system that is not in harmony with the world in which we live. And so we're all out of harmony. Not all of us, so people like you, myself, people out here in our audience have stepped out of that conventional world and found there's a better world on the other side out there. That the conventional world was the one that put us in the little box and took away our power.
Yeah. You know, what I often dub this era, as particularly as it pertains to our understanding of human biology, is the age of agency. And I think you were the one that opened the door into that era, into that paradigm shift. And
it wasn't easy in the beginning, Jeff.
No,
hell no.
No, people were trying to shut that door.
Oh my God, it was. I actually thought I was crazy because at some point I realized I can't stay in the medical school because no one looked at my research as being valid because it didn't conform to their belief system. So they were invalidating me, and my research was totally predictable. I could change the environment, and 3 days later, I'm going to get a different genetic expression. I can repeat this every day. They didn't care because they had invested everything into the genes and all that.
Right.
And I'll never forget it because when I started to come across, because the basic thing they said to me, well, what's the mechanism? I didn't know the mechanism. I knew the observation. So I went off on my own, and I found the mechanism, which was involved with the membrane of the cell, which is a computer chip. It's an information processor.
Yeah. Algorithms upon algorithms upon algorithms.
I got so excited, I asked my colleagues at the University of Wisconsin in the medical school, I said, I'd like to come back and give this talk. Well, they weren't that pleased because I had tenure and I walked out, and that's sort of like, they don't like that when people do it. But I thought I needed a scientific audience to say something to get a reflection back. So I remember I came to this talk. It's a Wednesday seminar, which in the school was like you bring your lunch in a bag and you sit down, and all the faculty and the students are there, and you BS with everybody. Well, some guy stands up in the front and yaks off, and everybody not paying attention and stuff. But I thought, at least I have an audience. So I start with this talk about membranes over DNA, which everybody, of course, was in DNA. Mm-hmm. And I'm getting toward the end, right about a minute or so before the end, it dawns on me, nobody opened their lunch bags. They're just sitting there looking at me like I came off a flying saucer, you know, they're staring at me. And then I come and I conclude and I say, thank you very much. That's the response. It was the deadest silence I ever heard in my life. Everybody just sat there. And it was not a noise, not a peep. And one guy, I'll never forget, one guy in the very back went twice, I remember. And they all looked at him and stared at him, and he put his hands down and stopped clapping. And like there was an invisible conductor, they all got up and they all walked out. And these were my former colleagues. And they all walked out, and I'm standing in the room alone. And I was thinking, oh my God, maybe I'm crazy, because crazy people think they're right, of course. And I'm thinking, they all left. Nobody asked me a question, nothing. I was so afraid, really, Jeff, I was so afraid. I thought, I got to find the answer to this. So I got a plane and I went to the University of Virginia where I got my PhD, and the members of my committee were very distinguished faculty people. One of them was one of the top cell biologists in the world, Lenny Rebin. And I go in and see Lenny sitting behind his giant desk with a big wing-back chair. Lenny Rebin, super guy. I'm sitting in the little chair in front of the desk, and I say, Lenny, I want to describe something. I want you to tell me what's wrong with my idea. So I give him the idea about the membrane and controlling genes and all that, and then he looks at me and he pauses and he goes, well, it's not what we're thinking. I said, I know it's not what you're thinking.
Wow.
I want you to tell me what's wrong with it. And he goes, it's too simple. I bellowed in laughter, which scared him. I couldn't hold it back. I laughed. And he's looking at me like I'm insane. And I laughed because I said, my first week of graduate school, you guys taught me something called Occam's razor. The simplest hypothesis is the most likely and should be considered before all other hypotheses. I said, if you think it's too simple, I accept that. And that's when I let go.
Sign.
I let go of the fear that I was wrong, waiting, though, for every time I gave a lecture for somebody to stand up and go, oh, you're wrong. But never happened.
The most famous formula in physics is relatively simple, E equals mc squared.
That's it. The shorter the equation, the more powerful the equation.
And isn't it funny that there have been these, and they may be apocryphal, I don't know, but there are these mythologized sort of end-of-life epiphanies, like where, there was the battle between Darwin and Lamarck, right? You know? And then on his deathbed, supposedly Darwin was like, no, it was the environment.
It was he recognized Lamarck in his last breath almost on the planet.
And I've also heard that ascribed similar ascription to Watson, because when Warburg was studying cancer early, I think that was in the 20s and 30s, when he, started to postulate this theory of essentially dysfunctional glycolysis. That was that cancer was very, very related to metabolism, essentially.
Exactly.
And then once sort of the genetic revolution came along, we spent all of our whole focus shifted to the underlying genetics, right? And I believe Watson, at the very end of his life, said, oh God, we should have focused more on Warburg's theory of metabolism. And so I think that oftentimes there is this great awakening right in the last chapter.
That's actually what's happened a number of different times, and it's interesting because when you follow them, what is the consequence of some guy who created this whole monster vision, then turning his back on the vision? What was the response? You ready? Oh, he's senile.
Right.
He's so old, he's senile now, so don't pay any attention anymore to what he says because he's over the edge right now. And they disregarded him they disregard him all the time. It's like,
well, I'll bet almost anything that on your deathbed you won't say, it was the gene.
I doubt that one. Yeah. It's been a great experience. And how many years did I wait for that unexpected person in an audience to come up and challenge it with something I didn't think about? And I'd be up in the front of the room looking like an idiot. And I waited for that, but it's been 40 years now. Something that hasn't happened. And everything is actually, what I talked about is conventional at this point, not in allopathic medicine, which is drug related, because this is now consciousness related. That's the difference.
Well, I'm so grateful you've come up here. I'm so excited for our mutual projects together. And your curiosity and your effusiveness is just infectious. So thank you for all the work you're doing.
I want to thank you for inviting me, B, for the community that you've built and established, because it gives me a platform to talk to people who are at least open to new thinking. Because the problem is the old thinking. And so I really appreciate this opportunity to come up here, because I love sharing this. And when people pick it up, they can profoundly walk away with a different life.
Yeah, it's funny. On just 2 days ago, I was, I know how much you talk about community and the power of community to heal, really. And of course, the name of our company is Commune, right? And I have obviously a sense for what that means, but I actually looked up the etymology of it. And com is like with, so that made sense. I sort of knew that. But mune comes from munis or municipal, which means duty or obligation. And there was this notion I started to understand this idea of the obligation that we have to each other. And that is, that kind of is the substrate of community, of creating a duty that we have actually to each other. And I think that that's a very valuable thing.
Well, you know, I love it because when I talk about brain size, and brain size, membrane of the cell is the intelligence of the cell. It's a membrane. The surface of the brain is like a membrane. And when you look at the brains of different mammals, and they're all folded up, that's how you can get more memory, you know, more potential into a brain by more surface area, by making all the gyri and sulci and squeezing it in the skull. And it turns out the biggest brains are in the cetaceans, the porpoises, dolphins, and whales. Mm. And everybody goes, well, do they have computers? I go, no, you don't understand. They don't have jobs. They swim around the world all the time, play with each other, find food wherever it is. They live in a community. They support each other. If one of the dolphins gets sick and can't breathe because they have to come up to the surface, the other dolphins in the community lift them up. That's a community to bring them up. They take care of each other. I'm going, man, you just missed the point. We're creating all this anxiety and all this stuff like this. They have a free life. They don't work. They just travel around the world. I say, who's more intelligent?
Right. Even the mushrooms, even their networks.
And, they connect everything.
So we suffer from an anthropocentric hubris.
Yeah.
But fortunately, hopefully we can bring some light to people and the power.
Well, we're being pushed to make a decision at this time. And that's why I'm so excited about what you're doing up here. I'm excited about my presentations. Why? Giving people more knowledge, more power to take power back over their lives rather than surrender and pay other people.
Yeah. Amen. All right. Thank you, Bruce.
Jeff,
appreciate you.
Appreciate it so very much. Yeah. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you. Hey, thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then I think you'll love this one too.